Hi, I'm Simon Garnett.
And I'm Laura Halliday.
And this is The Persuasion Game, the Forges podcast all about the art of persuasion.
Each episode, we connect with marketers, business leaders and beyond to learn how they use persuasion to influence their consumers, convince their stakeholders and drive their business forward. Hello, Simon.
Hi, Laura. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. Today, we are going to be talking about the emergence of an entirely new subcategory, which is the world of low and no alcohol. Is that something you partake in?
Yeah, well, 10 years ago, something like that. Probably I first started sort of doing dry January. I think I only completed it once. Completed it. There you go. Interesting language, just straight there.
Telling.
Yeah, and I think actually what that does is it really goes to part of what I felt the challenge was, which is it felt like it was a challenge. It felt like it was a competition. Everyone got a bit virtue signally, and it was like, oh, I've done this many days and you've done that many days. And it felt like, everyone was kind of competing with each other about it. And I actually found that quite sort of alienating because I just thought, well, if it then just leads people to these very sort of boring kind of behaviors of just not going out. And it was just kind of total abstinence. And actually, for me, the real gear change, I think, was when Heineken Zero came out. And I suddenly felt like it was enough of a beer for certain situations. So I'm a football fan. I like having a beer when I'm watching a game. During midweek games, I didn't necessarily want a beer. And a Zero was just enough. It gave me that ritual without actually having to have the alcohol. How about yourself?
I think you're so right. There's definitely a sense of that you should be doing it. I was very aware that my sleep was suffering, or I was feeling a bit worse in the morning, even if I just had a second glass of wine. And I think that consciousness of your overall health is something we've all been thinking about over the last few years a bit more. But I sort of just found it quite hard to actually motivate myself to do that. And I think the big twist for me was I was listening to a podcast with Lee Mack, who is not only very funny, but also a non-drinker now. And what he articulated was, you're not missing the booze, you're missing the feeling. And, you're missing that feeling of, it is 6 p.m, it's time to make dinner or something, it is time to chat and be social or just enter a different mode and have that, release and reward. And what he said was, I'd never tell anyone to stop drinking, but what I would suggest is that first drink is a non-alcoholic drink. And just see how you feel. See if you can get that feeling without, turning to booze. And he also recommended Freedom, which is extremely delicious, alongside Asahi Super Dry. And I've just been a big fan of that ever since, sitting there for a Netflix and a non-alcoholic beer.
Well, the reality is that a lot of the world's global beer players are betting big on low and no alcohol as the future of the beer category. In fact, Asahi, they anticipate 50% of their global sales will soon come from low and non by 2040, which is why it's so interesting to talk to our guest today. So joining us today to guide us through the world of non-alcoholic drinks is Grant Mckenzie, a seasoned marketing professional with a remarkable career at Asahi Breweries. Grant has been a trailblazer in promoting non-alcoholic beverages, championing the category long before it became a widespread trend.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Grant, it's so great to have you here today. Wanted to talk about initially what inspired you to focus on non-alcoholic beverages like Asahi Dry Zero within the company?
Well, I guess it was my experience when I worked in Spain. So I moved to be the marketing director for the beer business in Spain. And there I discovered about 10% of the sales of the business were non-alcohol beer, which was very high. So the company average at that time would have been 1.5%, 2% maximum. And what I discovered was the reason for that was that the beer was perceived as an adult refreshment, not necessarily as a core alcohol only product. As a result of that, it was very common and popular to drink non-alcohol beer at lunchtime or with afternoon snacks. What I also observed, there was what I termed it zebra striping, which was when people went out, they had 5 beers, but 2 of those beers in the middle would be non-alcoholic.
In the middle? Oh, that's
so they'd
interesting.
Have 2 alcoholic beers. The third one would be non-alcoholic. Then they'd go back to alcoholic, and then they'd finish with non-alcoholic. Now,
right.
This would be if you went to watch a football match. Typically, because it takes 2 hours, in Spain, it's hot weather. People would drink 5 beers, right? But if you think about what that means versus drinking 5 alcoholic ones, it's a 40% reduction in alcohol consumption. And it's an isotonic product, so it's hydrating you. So I guess I was there for 2 years. And then when I went back to Central Eastern Europe to work in the bigger units there, I brought this idea, if we could replicate that success in Spain, and it wasn't just our business, it was the market in Spain, wow, that would be a big opportunity. So essentially, I saw it apply elsewhere and thought this would be a great idea.
It's fantastic. Has that, because obviously we know, it's played out as an enormous development of the category. Has that kind of consumption been the same in other markets? Because I often have a non-alcoholic beer, as the first drink of the evening. I don't know if I'm a sample of one there, but are there differences across different markets?
There's significant differences at the moment. So what we were able to do at Asahi in Central Eastern Europe was get close to replicating that Spanish or German. So if you look today, the German market as well, more than 10% of the German beer market is actually non-alcoholic. Central Eastern Europe went that way, partly because ourselves and our competitors, to be fair, really, launched into this. In the UK market, it is still below 2% of the market, of the beer market. So it is growing very quickly. But I think there's been a reappraisal of non-alcohol beer from something quite terrible, like why would you do that, to something very interesting in particularly the last 3 to 4 years, I would say, in the UK.
And Grant, that's really interesting, that language of something quite terrible, something sort of quite positive. I always think with this category, it's really interesting in that what is the balance between, do you think, people running away from alcohol, so choosing to moderate, choosing to kind of actually, I don't want alcohol, versus running to non-alcoholic because of the benefits and the things that people are desiring there?
I guess you've summarized my marketing challenge in a nutshell, right? So the opportunity was to turn non-alcohol beer from a negative choice, control product. I have to do this because I want to moderate my consumption, and or I'm driving a car or I'm going back to work. So there's a control element, to a positive choice. I'm choosing this because it tastes great and it's better for me than the soft drink alternatives. I would say, to answer your question, it's a mixture. So some people are indeed moderating alcohol, trying to control it. I think you'll find, as I mentioned about zebra striping, most people are not giving up alcohol, they're trying to reduce. And the example I gave you, if you think about 5 beers watching football, if 2 of them are non-alcoholic, it's a 40% reduction. It's a very substantial reduction, as opposed to 0, which some people are going 0. I get that, but they're probably the minority. Most people are trying to just reduce or balance. But I think the big idea is to replace other things. So the big idea, the big opportunity, the big sales volume growth for non-alcohol beer in Central Eastern Europe has been replacing classic soft drinks in key soft drink occasions, because there's a big move away from highly sugary drinks and or their non-sugar artificial alternatives to a naturally brewed, low sugar, low calorie isotonic product, which is what non-alcohol beer is.
This frame of reference thing, I think is absolutely fascinating. And what is it we are trying to convince people to and to think about? I used to work at Diageo. I used to work for Guinness, and this is sort of back in the early mid late 2000s. And their sort of first iteration of Guinness Zero was launched under a campaign of 100% Guinness, 0% alcohol. And it was very much this sense of, we need to prove that we are still Guinness enough, that that this is still a Guinness. And it felt quite a defensive strategy, if you like. And frankly, I don't think they were alone. I think that was very much the kind of mindset there. What do you feel now about how the category is positioning it and where the most sort of success is being felt and the way in which that is being positioned?
Look, I think if you talk about the UK specifically, when you are looking at behaviour change, persuasion to behave, you first have to understand what are the current beliefs, what are the current issues to change the behavior, of which there were two. One is the taste of these products is bad, don't taste good. And number two is the social aspect, which is it doesn't look good when I drink this. People are going, what's wrong with you? You ill? Or if you're a woman, are you pregnant? Those are the things people ask you. So I think the marketing task, first of all, obviously, make the products taste better. So when we relaunched Peroni Nastro Azzurro 00, we totally, completely changed the technology in the brewery to make that product. So it transformed itself completely to make sure that product tasted brilliant. Before that, there was another product, it just wasn't good enough. I think the second point then is to position the way you talk about, the way that you demonstrate this product is not just in control areas. Like, it's quite a negative thing. I understand 100% taste, 0% alcohol. Yeah, but it's still got a zero in there. It still feels like, So obviously the big thing that I did was we positioned it with Formula One. So we went with the Aston Martin team with Peroni, now with Ferrari. And it started to market itself with the exciting sports. Central Eastern Europe, and you'll see in Germany, they led with this. All of participation sports are sponsored by non-alcohol beers. I mean, running, triathlons, cycling events, because it's a perfect after sport product. And of course, that's perceived as for healthy and active and successful people, let's call it. And it's a much more positive way of talking about the product than saying it's in a pub and it tastes like Guinness, but it hasn't got zero. And by the way, their new product is excellent, right? And I think they've got the recipe right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I saw the advert the other day with the Corona Zero sponsoring the Olympics, and exactly that going on their non-alcohol kind of brand as their lead. And I think you're right. I think that sense of, if you want to persuade someone to do something, emphasize what it is, not what it isn't. How far can you ever get on the basis of, well, it doesn't have this or it doesn't have that, and actually emphasizing that real positive and creating some aspiration feels absolutely integral to that.
Yeah, because
Did you have any?
At that point, it was still being positioned within the beer category. So relative to beer, this is what we are. But if you position it in the soft drinks category, and you say, relative to soft drinks, what are we? Then you get a much more interesting conversation. So you say to people, let's take the numbers. These soft drinks have 12 grams of sugar. We have 4. They have 110 calories. We have 13. We are isotonic. We have a sweet but bitter profile. They're very sweet. Does any of that sound interesting? And they're like, oh yeah, that sounds interesting. Because you're positioning it against soft drinks as opposed to, well, it doesn't quite taste like the other beer. Which might be true, but maybe that's the wrong positioning.
That definitely chimes with me. I mean, I was in the pub last night and was actually zebra striping, as you call it, and doing that. And often the comment that people will say to me is, well, doesn't it just, wouldn't you just rather have a beer? And actually, that's never my frame of reference. My frame of reference is, I don't want a soft drink.
I think most soft drinks, not all of them, but most soft drinks, when they develop the products, they test them with teenagers and younger people because that's where the market is. Whereas with non-alcohol beer, it's always, of course, adults.
Did you have any key moments in the kind of marketing journey where you thought, I think we're shifting the needle here? Like, I think this sponsorship is really working, or, I can start seeing consumers are using language, or like, were there any kind of aha moments, or was it much more incremental than that?
Well, I think the first year or so was pretty tough because when I started the journey in the company, absolutely nobody believed me. So they could see that the market today was not there. What are you doing? And the first year, the innovations and the products did okay, but not great. Didn't meet business case, didn't look good. And most people in these businesses have been employed as great operators, not great strategists. The first 18 months to 2 years, it was a constant battle to keep alive the support. I think when we start, I think it was year 2 got better, but year 3, if I recall, the volume started to treble, quadruple. So you're talking about 200% growth rates. And that's, of course, when people go, And then it started to, when we did the analysis of who was buying it, And then we started to see things like at lunchtime, where we first went to the retailers, can we do like a meal deal at lunchtime? And they're, are you nuts? And by year 3, it was regularly on promotion at meal deals and selling better than any of the soft drinks that we said, people get this now.
Because it's new occasions, new consumers. Yeah, you're broadening the category. That's really interesting. How did you manage to get people engaged with the idea when the numbers weren't stacking up for you in those first 18 months?
So I think there's a degree of irrational persuasion. So the rational persuasion is, we know the alcoholic beer category is declining in all our markets. Everybody knows that. And therefore we have to find new sources of growth. And everyone goes, yeah, that's right. We know that there are, in the new generation, so the 18 to 25-year-olds, are drinking far less alcohol than any previous generation, depending on the market, by up to 30%, 40%, I mean, significant numbers. And they're choosing soft drinks. And therefore, there's an opportunity in that market, and everybody agrees with that rationale. When we do it right, non-alcohol beer could be positioned at a premium price, and there's no excise, no alcohol tax, because it's got no alcohol. Therefore, financially, it's quite profitable to do this. So you use the logic to say, if we can make this work, it's a new source of growth into incremental space in the market, and it's highly profitable. But you still need that bit of, trust me, believe me, it will work. And that was the hard part, because the group that I worked for, at the corporate level, didn't believe in any of this. So it was quite tough. But I had, and this is where you need luck. You need luck that your boss or your management team gives you the benefit of the doubt. And that's very subjective. Not everybody has that, and you don't have it in every job. But they let it run. And by the middle of year 2, they could say, okay, this is definitely not terrible. We're not sure it's brilliant, but it's definitely not. And by year 3, yeah, this is a good idea. And by year 4, everyone said, I told you it would work. I knew all along, But still,
did you have to use a bit of storytelling and imagine a world? You're in Barcelona.
Of course. So the vision was, we set a number which people thought was pie in the sky. It was about triple the volume that we were selling at that point in time. And we said by 2020, because this was back in 2013, by 2020 we're going to triple the volume, quadruple the revenue, and bring in all these new consumers. In fact, we overachieved that by 2020. But as I said, the first 2 years were behind that plan substantially. Year 3 got a bit better. It was only by year 6 that we were starting to track on or above that plan, which is not uncommon. So I guess I got a bit lucky, but there was constant reappraisal of the business case. And I guess the other thing that happened, I think it was year 4, is we put one of the products on draft, like draft. So in a bar, in a pub, UK is very similar. In many of these countries, the difference between having a product in a bottle and having it on draft, the sales can be 3 times higher, right? Because people see it and they try it. We trialed in, 100 outlets draft, and it flew in the summer. I mean, it really was a hit, surprised everyone. And I think that became the second turning point to go, this is not just a lunchtime can of, soft drink. This is a serious business here.
It's great to hear you tell that story and talk about a little bit of luck, etc. But at the same time, some of those timeframes you're talking are pretty extraordinary in lots of big manufacturing companies, and we work with a range of kind of the biggest companies in the world, and that level of patience and determination to see something through is pretty extraordinary. So whilst I love your self-effacing kind of nature of getting a little bit lucky, I'm also, 2 things. Firstly, it must have taken immense personal resilience and belief to keep going yourself when these results were there. So I'd love to sort of hear a little bit more about what led to that. And then secondly, was there anything else that you kind of sat there and just felt, that you did do, maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously, that you think helped drive that resilience and that patience within the organization?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say is you have to deliver the numbers. So if you're going to spend on this, you need to find efficiency, in polite words. You need to cut budgets elsewhere. There's absolutely no way they're just going to throw money at this, right? So your marketing budget is 100, and if you're lucky, each year it grows 1%. So after 5 years, it's 106, but it's not going to be more. So my role with the team was to say, guys, we're going to spend 20% on this. Therefore, we need to find that money elsewhere. And you have to do that, right? That shows to the board, to your colleagues, that you're responsible, that you're not just, throwing the stuff. Did I doubt we'd reach all the business cases? Yeah, of course. But I thought if we underhit it 10%, it's still a remarkable success, And then the second stage of the journey for me was, because that was all done in one country. When I was in Czechoslovakia, that's what I did. Then when I moved into the regional and global role, I had to persuade again other countries to do the same thing. So the second half of the story is, all right, you've got the success in the markets you control. Now you're ahead of a region and everyone else is telling you the same things your colleagues did 6 years earlier. It won't work here. You see, this is a different market. Our consumers are different. Exactly what I could write down. I said, I'm going to write down what you're going to say. And I'll put it on a piece of paper in an envelope and we'll open it after 10 minutes. 10 minutes, almost word for word. Not because I'm a genius, because it's understandable what you're going to tell me, but it's just not right, guys. And we went through that journey.
You Darren Browned them. I love it. That's great.
UK market was one of the toughest. I mean, I think at this stage, the biggest growth opportunity is still category growth, right? So if you think that the category is 2%, it should be 10%. There's 500% category growth. So even if your market share is flat, I think you've got that growth. Will that take 7, 10 years, 12 years? I'm not sure, but something like that. Second point then is brand. People buy brands. So you need to ensure, in our case, Peroni or Asahi in the UK are strong brands. And then innovation. So we innovated to make the product better. Down the line, the range needs to expand to accommodate the opportunity in the market, because at least half of that opportunity is probably going to be outside core bitter non-alcohol beer.
So will that be your flavours and the things you were talking about earlier?
Yes. How that's done is a debate. When that's done is a debate, but it will come. But like it's a classic brand story. You need to innovate at the right moment, and you need to ensure that your brand is available and top of people's mind.
Grant, I'd love to talk a little bit more about the future of this category, because I think one of the things really fascinating about it is that in many ways, for the big brands that have driven this, the challenge has been one of replication. As you say, have we got a good product? Go back to the Guinness Zero example. When it first launched, it just wasn't a terribly good Guinness, right? People could taste it. And I'm always struck a little bit by the category of plant-based, where you look at a lot of the plant-based meats brands that came in, and when Beyond Burger came in and created a burger that, again, was probably, 80, 90, 95% as good as a burger. And people went, that's a really good replication exercise. But what we've seen in that category is that desire just to replicate has sort of plateaued a little bit. And people have kind of, the fizz has come out of the market. There's less excitement now. But where there does seem to be quite a lot of excitement is plant-based as a canvas to explore, to create, to do new things. And I'm interested in your view as to that next horizon of growth for non-alcoholic, and whether there's that space to redefine it from one of replication to one of experimentation and creativity.
Well, I think there's two parts to the question. One is, what is it supposed to taste like? Now, if you go to the UK market, soft drinks brands, I don't know the exact number, I don't work in soft drinks, but a very high percentage of their sales are actually the light or zero sugar versions. And actually a much smaller percentage is the full one. And therefore people's taste becomes accustomed to that. That's what's normal taste. And then when they drink the full sugar one, they're like, wow, what the hell is that? And when you go to other markets, it's different. So I think over time, beer is becoming lighter. It used to be in the 90s, when I was a student, it was 5% or nothing, quite strong. Over time, that's coming down and down. Most people look for drinkability. I mean, having flavour is great, but it has to be less intense. I think craft non-alcohol, as you would call it, or let's call it non-lager non-alcohol. So like the wheat style, the IPA style, the ales, you can actually make great tasting NAB because you've got so much more flavour complexity than you do with a lager. And I think there will be more and more innovation in this space, as you say, because it's not a secret that this is the growing category
So what are the top 3 things you would say to someone who maybe was thinking about switching, but there's always those resistors in the pub, aren't there, where they go like, oh no, it's not the same?
Well, I think I would, first of all, say choose an occasion where you would typically have a soft drink. I know if it's lunch, mid-afternoon, watching telly on a Monday night, and just take a couple of non-alcohol, or take a non-alcohol beer instead. Second thing I'd recommend, try a couple of different styles or types. So yeah, try a Peroni, try a Guinness, try a ale, and realise there's no such thing as a non-alcohol beer. there's a lot of variety there. I think then when people do that, they realise there's a place in their life for this, and it may not be Friday night down the pub with your mates. Maybe that's not the occasion for it, but there's plenty of other cold, refreshing drink occasions where it fits very well. I think on the it doesn't look good thing, I mean, at the end of the day now, when it's poured into a glass, or if it's in draft, which I think is the next big step in the UK, it looks exactly the same. So we know that one of the things that helps it is when it's poured from the Peroni bottle into a Peroni glass and given to someone, it is undistinguishable from the 5% alcohol version. So nobody says anything. Whereas if you stand there with a fruit juice or a cola or something, that's pretty distinguishing, yeah? So if that's important to you, there's an easy solution.
Grant, I want to ask a question about the wine and spirits category and no alcohol in there. Obviously, there's been quite a lot of excitement and noise within spirits. All sorts of different brands, Seedlip, I guess, doing it. But again, lots of the big, particularly in gin, a lot of the big players having their zero version. Wine, far less. From my very amateur understanding, I believe the technical challenge in wine is incredibly difficult, sort of de-alcoholization of wine. But I'm just interested, how do you look at beer and then other alcohol categories, wine and spirits? Where do you think there are similarities? Where do you think there are differences? If we transfer 10 years in the future, what do you expect those categories will be like as well?
So I always thought, beer is a refreshment. Wine and spirits are not refreshment. And in classic beer markets, historically, and by the way, the UK is one of them, beer was consumed as a refreshment. And the history in the UK and other markets is beer was about 3.5% alcohol, yeah? Even less. It wasn't strong. And you would have one at lunchtime. Yeah, the mild. And if you go back even further to Victorian times, of course, 2%, 1.5% beer was served to children because the water can kill you, but the beer it's safe, you know what I mean? So I always thought beer therefore had a natural relationship in refreshment. Wine is a different thing. It's used for a different purpose. I'm not saying negative, I'm saying it has a different purpose. And I'm not a big wine expert, but people definitely choose wine for the taste, the complexity, most people. And that, if you lose that, it loses its appeal in the core, food occasions. And spirits, quite a lot of them are used in cocktails. I think it's easy to replace the alcohol from that because it's got such a complexity of taste anyway, in a cocktail, because you're mixing different things. But a standalone, neat, non-alcohol whiskey, again, I don't think that's a big idea, because I think it's just a different reason you're consuming that than a refreshment. Every day people have refreshment drinks, but they don't necessarily have cocktails or neat spirits and stuff. I think they will develop, so I'm not saying there won't be things. I just don't see it nearly, not even close to being as attractive a marketplace as the non-alcohol beer.
If it's not wine, if it's not spirits, do you look at a category and think, there's a category that I could see the same kind of model applying? I could see a redefinition, a reframing to change how that looks in sort of 5, 10, 15 years' time.
I mean, there are a few other things that come to mind, but one that I would reflect on. So when I looked at what were the threats for non-alcohol beer, because now when the company got all excited about it, you then have to, ironically, change your position and say, well, don't get too excited, guys, because, And I think the threat is every single drinks company understands the the growth is in adult soft drinks. How do you define adult? You define it as more complex taste, less sugar or nasties. And brewing and fermenting, which have been around for millennia, are the basis. So products like kombuchas, which today are super niche, they could become quite mainstream in the future. And other types of soft drinks where it's not about water and sugar and colour and being a bit, but more sophisticated stuff, that is unquestionably a big opportunity. Nobody yet has been able to take it mass because they're too expensive. But when someone gets into it properly with the branding, with the expertise, I think there's a big opportunity.
And then it's interesting how other categories follow on from that. We were talking to someone with an ice cream specialism, and he said, ice cream is following confectionery. It's all going to be like really concentrated, but like small little portions, as opposed to those sort of triple scoops that, well, that's what I remember from my childhood anyway.
Grant, that was superb, incredibly helpful. Thank
Very
you.
insightful.
Brilliant discussion. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really lovely to chat to you.
Yeah, thanks. It was great fun. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you so much, Grant. So Simon, what did you think?
I loved that conversation. Found it hugely interesting. In particular, what I loved was about picking the frame of reference. And I think a lot of the time beer has gone wrong because low alcohol, non-alcohol beer has gone wrong because it has tried to be about going, it's almost as good as beer. I remember a very early launch back in the mid-2000s of Guinness Zero with the tagline of 100% Guinness, 0% beer. And it was absolutely, it's just trying to go, well, this is good. Whereas actually what Grant was talking to us about was anchoring against a different occasion where, if I go into a pub and I order a soft drink, well, that's what my kids have. That doesn't feel adult. It doesn't feel sophisticated. It doesn't do what you were saying Lee Mack was talking about in terms of demarcating that day and kind of going, this is your kind of moment. And so in picking an occasion that isn't a kind of classic beer heartland, but instead more of a soft drink occasion, we're able to identify a more receptive audience, proper incremental growth. And I think thinking when we're trying to persuade about what is the frame of reference that we can do, can we choose a different frame of reference than the one we're currently working to create perhaps a bit of an enemy or a comparison, a tension point.
A new value reframe.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
How about yourself?
I took that as one of the key points about persuasion. The other thing I took out was his personal persuasion journey. And I think what was very interesting is sometimes we talk about people being, sort of leaders in pushing through a new way of thinking. And there's almost a sort of heroizing of being very evangelical and, not receptive to people's points of view and just sort of hammering your point home. What was really clear with Grant was this was like a really patient journey where he was, he had his conviction about it, but he had the data to back it up. He had those conversations consistently, taking people on the journey, giving them examples, giving them analogous markets, looking at the trends. And he was just, saying, look, that's inarguable. It's not about like me as this sort of meta personality that's controlling everything. It's about something that we can all see. And I just need to help people see that. And I just thought that was a really lovely way to think about leadership and persuasion in a more sort of nuanced way.
I love that. It shows that persuasion comes in multiple forms and there is no single archetype that we have to do.
Yes.
On which note to self, less jazz hands.
No, never.
No,
Keep the
I know,
jazz.
Laura. I know. Strong. Anyway, lovely to see you again, Laura.
You too, Simon.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening. If you'd love to hear more from marketers, entrepreneurs, and business leaders about how to use the art of persuasion to drive your business forward, make sure you're following the podcast in your favourite podcast app.
And just the last ask from us. This is a new podcast, and we'd love it if you could be persuaded to help us spread the word by telling somebody else about it, leaving us a review, or even better, sharing an episode on socials. Search for The Forge on LinkedIn.